You know, it really seems like ABC News just can't catch a break, right? They got the FCC all over them. Then they have an opportunity to do an interview at the White House, and it didn't go so well. It didn't go so well. We'll talk about that, plus the latest and greatest out of the FCC. Brendan Carr not holding back on ABC or CBS or NBC for that matter, we should point out. Welcome to the program, everyone. We've got a lot on that. Plus, there's a judge out on the lefty West Coast that says, you know what? ICE doesn't have to have a warrant for someone's arrest. That's kind of crazy, right? As you're a suspected criminal, you're here illegally, and now ICE doesn't, or rather, forgive me, I should rephrase that. ICE has to have a warrant for your arrest. Forgive me, they have to, which, I mean, it's kind of bizarre because it's never been that way before. We're going to talk about that, as well as what happened just around this time yesterday. The court out in Wisconsin announced that it was suspending the Milwaukee judge that took it upon herself to allow an illegal migrant who was believed to have committed a crime to escape out the back door. What is going on in this world? And everybody's freaking out because the State Department, it turns out, has revoked 4,000 visas. Marco Rubio says he has every right to, and guess what? He does. Welcome to the program, everyone. Good to have you here. We are live, and ABC News is yet again in the hot seat. This time it's kind of funny, I gotta tell you. Like, if you haven't seen this, we got some fun stuff to show you here because, listen, Donald Trump is not holding back. And this was just great. They got into a discussion there about whether or not, this is the reporter Terry Moran, who nobody had really ever heard of, including Donald Trump. He had never heard of the guy. He actually told him that. It was kind of humiliating to Terry, right to his face. But anyway, they had this conversation about whether or not Pete Hegseth should be in the job at the Pentagon. And Terry, got a lot out of him, and then finally was like, are you 100% behind him? And finally, the president just lost it on him. Epic, humiliating moment for this reporter and for ABC. Of course, let's watch.
One question about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. There's a lot of turmoil at the Pentagon right now. There's the signal chat with his wife on it where he's discussing that attack in Yemen. There's another signal chat discussing the attack on Yemen. There's a reporter accidentally involved. You said the other day that you had a talk with the secretary. Did you take him to the woodshed?
I had a talk with him, and whatever I said, I probably wouldn't be inclined to tell you. But we had a good talk. He's a talented guy. He's young. He's smart, highly educated. And I think he's going to be a very good hopefully a great defense secretary, but he'll be a very good defense secretary.
You have 100% confidence in Pete Hegseth?
I don't have 100% confidence in anything. Okay? Anything. Do I have 100%? It's a stupid question. Look.
It's a pretty important position.
No. You don't have 100%. Only a liar would say I have 100% confidence. I don't have 100% confidence that we're going to finish this interview.
We will.
That was great, right? I mean, it is a stupid question. Come on, who has 100% confidence in anything? And he's right. Only a liar is going to sit there and say, I have 100% confidence in this, that, or the other. So it was a stupid question. It was kind of like one of those gotcha things. It's like Terry wanted to make sure that he had on record that the president said, I have 100% confidence in Pete Hegseth, just in case something happens with Pete, and maybe Pete steps down in the future, he can say, you lied. Well, Donald Trump was not going to fall for that, or anything else for that matter, because it went from one little thing to the next. I mean, Trump was fired up, and this reporter, he's getting his big day, his big debut. He's suddenly on people's television screens. You've heard of him now, which maybe you probably hadn't before. So this was a big moment. But again, it was totally humiliating. Here he is trying to push Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's coming back saying, you guys are the fake news. You guys are the ones that sat there for how many years? 4 years, and tried to say that Biden was in perfectly good health when you knew better. You absolutely knew. So we don't trust you, do we? ABC News. And by the way, this is part of what Brendan Carr is alleging, that America no longer has any faith or trust in the news media and outlets like ABC News because of what they did. Here, watch it.
Do you think the reputation of the United States has gone down under your presidency?
No, I think it's gone way up, and I think we're a respected country again. We were laughed at all over the world. We had a president that couldn't walk up a flight of stairs, couldn't walk down a flight of stairs, couldn't walk across the stage without falling. We had a president that was grossly incompetent. You knew it, I knew it, and everybody knew it, but you guys didn't want to write it because you're fake news.
All right. Thank you.
And by the way, ABC is one of the worst. I have to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Okay, so he got that little dig in there. I mean, this was humiliating, was it not, for the network? And when he says ABC is one of the worst, that's kind of a loaded comment. It's a loaded comment because Brendan Carr right now has already informed Bob Iger, who is the CEO of Disney. Disney is the parent company of ABC News. Believe me, we talked about this yesterday. Disney wants to unload this thing like you wouldn't believe. It is like a hot tamale, right? They don't want this thing at all. Why? Because it's not growing. It is not the future. This is the future right here, what we're doing right now. Make sure you subscribe, share, like, make a comment, all that good stuff. I love the likes. I see lots of likes right now. So listen, this is the future. ABC News is not. And Disney knows that. And so it wants to get rid of this thing like you wouldn't believe, just from a pure sort of business standpoint, right? It doesn't make a ton of sense. The problem that ABC is having is they cannot sell it for what they would like. The offer on the table, per my sources at Nexstar, was $10 billion. Okay, that sounds like a lot of money. Turns out, though, Disney bought this thing, ABC News and ABC, the network, for some $19 billion years ago, like back in the early 90s, right? So they're like, wait a second, we can't take that kind of haircut on it. Maybe we can try and do something. Like, is there any way we can like rev up the streaming business, something, right? So they've been doing all this reorg, et cetera. I don't think any of it's going to work. Fundamentally, they are stuck in the dark ages, and this is the problem with every major network right now. This is what we keep talking about, a common theme. On top of that, you know, they've all been run by the so-called deep state for so long, they don't know how to do any real reporting. They don't know how to check any sources. They don't know how to have an opinion that's not top-down, dictated from management. And so when Donald Trump's like, wait, you guys just sat there for 4 years. You're like one of the worst. You like covered Biden as though he was the Messiah when he was really struggling, and we all knew he was struggling. Why did you do that? They have no answer. And this is what Brendan Carr is coming back to at the FCC. In fact, if you look at his letter that he sent to one Bob Iger, he pointed that out, suggesting that he's not going to actually renew the affiliate deals that they have with their 200 and some odd affiliates all over the country. You know, it's a misnomer to think that they own their affiliates. I think they only own about 7 of them. They've got some big market affiliates, but the rest are smaller businesses, and they have to pay a big fee to get that interview with Terry Moran. I mean, that might be worth paying for, right? That was actually pretty funny. But they're also paying for The View and all the other programming. And the FCC, which controls the airwaves in traditional broadcast TV, is saying, gee, you know, you guys aren't really all that. Americans don't trust you anymore. And so maybe we shouldn't actually be licensing the ABC brand to all of these affiliates across the country. I bet a lot of those affiliates would love to have the time back anyway. They have all these contracts, right, where they have to run The View, and they have to run ABC World News Tonight, et cetera, and Georgie Poo on the weekend. They have to run those shows, and so maybe that time gets given back to them, meaning that ABC News is even more doomed than you even thought. But it got better. I digress. We're getting into the business. I want to get back to the interview itself, because this was a moment. They had a little moment on the guy down in El Salvador. Remember Garcia, who was wrongly apprehended according to the government, although that story's been changing because Stephen Miller keeps making the point, hey, you know, he was here illegally and he had been arrested before, and they wouldn't allow him out on bail because they were fearful that he was part of MS13, and they had some verification of that, and they cited some of his tattoos, etc. So this came up in the interview, and it was a moment. Let's just say it was a moment. I got to play it for you because, wow, Trump was not having it. And nor was Terry, for that matter. It was quite a showdown. Watch.
He wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute over that.
Wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
Oh, he had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS13.
It says MS13.
That was photoshopped. So let me
That was photoshopped, Terry. You can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You know, you're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. But I picked you, Terry. but you're not being very nice. He had MS13 tattooed.
We'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry, do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture. We'll
and you
agree
think it was
to disagree.
Photoshop? Well,
Here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He
Fair
had
enough.
MS13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine,
No,
sir.
Terry,
I want to get to
Terry,
Ukraine.
No. He had MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news, because
when
it's
he was
fake
photographed
news.
in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go on. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They weren't there, but they're there now, right?
No,
but
they're in
now.
your picture.
Terry,
Ukraine, sir.
he's got MS13 on his knuckles.
All right.
Okay?
All right. Well, we'll take a look at that.
You do such a disservice.
We'll take a look at
Why
that,
don't you
sir.
just say, yes, he does, and, go on to something else?
It's contested.
Ooh. So that was one of those moments. Now, Terry's making the point that they were photoshopped in. I was not aware of that. What I was aware of was that there was actual evidence in the court of law that said he had certain markings that were indicative of being a gang member. Okay, so now I don't know if they were on his hands or whatever, but that was actually on file. So we'll see how this all shakes out in the wash. But I got to say, has Trump been really that wrong on anything? Every time, it reminds me of, remember when he said in May 2020, when the Fox reporter asked him about, was there any evidence that that virus came from Wuhan, China? And he said, well, yeah, actually, I've seen some evidence to that fact that it came out of the lab. I have seen some intelligence that suggests it came from that lab in Wuhan, China. And the whole world went, oh. And then all of a sudden, there were all these articles, a flurry of articles, the New York Times, Nature, Journal, whatever, all the science magazines, they slammed him. And that might have been around the time that he lost his Twitter account. I mean, it was like, how dare you? How dare you say that? They were like, oh, he's a crazy man. He's making stuff up. He wasn't making it up. In fact, I had sources going back as far as February of 2020 that had told me that that virus came straight out of the Wuhan lab in China. All right, so that information was being circulated, and people, they didn't have a particular bias in this. They actually said it was a mistake, and China didn't mean to do it. But I always thought, why is it that we're hiding that from people? Were we hiding that from people because we were worried about some World War III? Did Anthony Fauci have to communicate certain things? Did Anthony Fauci not want anybody to know the role that we may have played in funding an organization which then turned around and funded that lab? Those are questions, right? But Donald Trump put it all out there and everybody went nuts. Oh, and then there was that cats and the dogs thing, right? Wasn't that ABC too? Remember that? They were like, we have no evidence that the cats and the dogs, and then a week or two later, something surfaced that suggested there was actually a murkier gray ground on that story. Anyway, I digress. The point is, this was epic, okay? And this poor reporter who goes in there thinking he's got his big moment, I think actually probably did himself no favors in that, he's constantly at battle. I'll just tell you this, as somebody who's interviewed many heads of state, including Democrats, okay, including the likes of Bill Clinton to Donald Trump. You need to be able to read the room, okay? And sometimes you get a little more with honey, right, than you do with going in with all the zingers. And so it's kind of like a give and take. And the more you can have that give and take, you got to pick your battles, right? But he just wanted to have, I guess it was a good show. Maybe he's been watching a little bit of cable or, some streaming stuff. He's trying to figure out how to be part of the future over at ABC News. Take a look at Donald Trump just moments ago speaking about the Garcia case to reporters. He had a cabinet meeting today, and as you know, so many of those are being broadcast live. Let's take a listen to him saying a few words about Garcia and basically saying, listen, we'll leave it to the lawyers. Here we go.
Mr. President, yesterday you told ABC News, Mr. President, you told ABC News yesterday that you could get Abrego Garcia back if you wanted to. Do you think President Bukele would turn you down if you made that request?
I really don't know. I know that he's been a great friend of our country. He's gotten a lot less money than this would take from us if we were going to build these jails and do what he's doing. And they run a very professional operation. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him. I really leave that to the lawyers, and I take my advice from Pam and everybody that is very much involved. They know the laws, and We follow the laws exactly.
Aha. So we'll see where this all shakes out. I mean, Stephen Miller has been pretty darn clear on this, has he not? The guy is from El Salvador. He was in the country illegally. If he comes back in, we will deport him again to where? El Salvador. Now, I don't actually think they can let him out of the prison. He's not in the really scary prison in El Salvador. He's in a different prison. He's been moved. We know that because, of course, the Maryland man, the other Maryland man, the senator, right? The Democrat senator, Van Hollen, went down there to visit with him, and he informed us that he had been moved to another prison. I suspect that they can't actually just let him loose on the street in El Salvador, because El Salvador is still a pretty dicey place, and there are, even though they've brought the crime down considerably, there are still people that would be out to get him. So that remains an open question at this point, but I'll tell you, this was just a humiliating experience overall for the reporter. It was great, TV, heck, here we are talking about it today. I don't think it did anybody any favors, though, over at ABC News. Not that you're looking for favors, right? Your job is to get the story, and you have to be willing to push back. I get it. But this became very contentious, and it's coming at a time when that is the last thing that ABC News and Bob Iger over at Disney need. I mean, they need, dare I say, they gotta have somebody like the woman on The View that's the conservative, with the long dark hair. You know who I'm talking about? That would have been more appropriate probably to have her, Alyssa, do the interview, just because it would have helped grease the wheels, at least for ABC. And then you can go in later with your Terrys or your Georgie Poos or whoever else you want. I don't think he would have agreed to Georgie Poo, though. He said he agreed to this guy because he didn't know who he was. Well, now everybody knows who he is, all right? Funny stuff. It's all coming, by the way, as a judge says, we need ICE to have warrants. We must have warrants if they are going to make any arrests of illegal migrants. It's kind of a wild story, and it's setting up this big showdown between state and federal government. I'll tell you, the federal government's going to win that all day long, but you got to see what's going on. I'm going to get to that in a second. We got a market that traded off today, right? A lot of reasons for that. People are worried about GDP down 0.3%. There's a little more to those numbers. I wouldn't be as concerned about it as some people right now. But you know what? If you are concerned, or even if you're not, because I'm actually a big believer in gold as a long-term investment. We just put a piece out on that actually today over at 76 Research. While a lot of people have rushed into gold, it's so much so that it's beaten the S&P over the last 20 years. The question is, does that opportunity still remain? And I encourage you to go to 76 Research and get the information on that, because we put out a really good piece. But if you want the punchline, it's that, yeah, it does still remain for different reasons, not related as much to the empty money supply, but more so related to what's going on in the world. And that is this uncertainty. And you get countries like China, which actually haven't really bought as much gold as they could, saying, hey, maybe I diversify out of U.S. treasuries, because this is a little rocky, this relationship with the U.S. And so they're going in and buying gold. So gold still, in my estimation, as well as my colleague at 76 Research estimation, still has this opportunity in front of it. Text Trish to 65532 to learn more. You can get up to $15,000 worth of free silver with our friends over at American Hartford Gold. You can call them at 1-844-495-1115, or you can go to the website, trishlovesgold.com. I do, okay? And I want you to love it as well. I especially love it because I've done quite well on gold over the last several years. And hopefully, if you've been watching this show, you have too. So a judge out on the lefty West Coast is saying, you know what? In order for ICE to apprehend any illegal migrants, they got to have a warrant. Now, this is unusual because historically they have not needed a warrant. Why? Because the thinking is, if you've got somebody who's a criminal, who's here illegally, and if you have to go fuss around to get that warrant, they might actually flee and you don't have the time to arrest them. So if you believe them to be a criminal, you in the federal government have that ability to move forward. This is the judge, a California judge, of course, Jennifer Thurston, temporarily blocking Border Patrol agents from making warrantless arrests of suspected illegal migrants without probable cause that they may flee before a warrant is obtained. So she's trying to create a lot of paperwork and a lot of bureaucracy to get in the way of all of this.
All right, another judicial pushback against President Trump's immigration crackdown. This comes after dozens were arrested in January during Border Patrol's Operation Return to Sender, where agents rounded up people determined to have entered the who were determined to have entered the country illegally. Yesterday, California District Judge Jennifer Thurston demanded CBP agents cannot arrest suspected illegal migrants without a warrant or reason to believe the person is a flight risk before they can get one.
Okay, so that's just wrong because, again, we're getting down into this federal versus state breakdown. And on this particular issue, when it comes to the border and who's in the country, I hate to break it to them, but this is the Fed's responsibility all day long, okay? This is like the one power that the federal government really and truly does have. So for them to say, okay, we're going to demand this, that, and the other, the California judge does not have the ability to do this. And the law is pretty darn clear on this. So where are we heading? I mean, we could be heading to the Supreme Court. For sure, you've got Chuck Schumer hoping and praying that we're going to the Supreme Court. But then what happens? When the Supreme Court tells him he's wrong, he wants a full-on Civil War, constitutional crisis-esque thing. I mean, this is dangerous where they're taking us, but here they are, ladies and gentlemen. Chuck Schumer at his best, worst. I don't know what to call this.
Immigration advocates have been warning we are on the verge of a constitutional crisis. Has that crisis arrived, Senator?
Yes, it has, unfortunately, because Trump wants to be king. A king doesn't have a constitution. A king just does whatever he wants, and Biondi just goes along with them.
Just goes along with them, huh? I mean, it's really just sort of insane.
Immigration advocates have
Let's
been...
fast forward a little bit more. Oh, that's all we have. Okay,
Senator.
Forgive me. He goes
Yes,
on. You don't want to hear
it
Chuck
has,
Schumer anyway. I know, yeah. He goes on to say that this is heading into a constitutional crisis. It's a total breakdown, ladies and gentlemen. Well, no, because again, let's go back to the powers that the federal government actually has. I mean, the California judge, she might be as crazy as the Wisconsin judge, but there is no there. When this is all coming out in the wash, I know you don't all like Barr, right? But Bill Barr, former Attorney General, it's almost more important to hear this from him because he's not necessarily a huge Trump fan, but he's pretty clear on the law. And you know where he comes out? Exactly where I come out. Exactly where I come out. I don't have a legal background, but you know what? I do know that the one thing the federal government has power over is the actual borders and who's in the country and naturalization. Here's General Barr explaining the sanctuary city issue and why these judges are way out over their skis when they're interfering.
One of the ways we identify these illegal aliens is when they're picked up by local police for violating the law there. Could be domestic violence, petty theft, whatever. They're brought into state court. Now, in the old days, before the sanctuary cities movement got going, they'd be turned over to federal officials. But since the sanctuary cities took effect, we've had local judges let these people go and sneak them out the back door so that ICE agents can't pick them up. And in fact, back in September 2019, in the first term, we charged a judge in Massachusetts for a very similar action to what this Milwaukee judge
But
did.
it's the response to this, the actual arrest of these. And in the case of that judge who spirited her, the perp that was on the stand out the back door, I mean, she actually had to be chased down and was perp walked. And the judge and his wife went through a similar escapade with federal agents. I mean, it does seem like it's reached a critical point here. And I just wonder what's going to happen next. I mean, are we going to see this bounced up somehow eventually to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, I doubt it'll get to the Supreme Court because I think the law is so clear. The states argue, the sanctuary states argue, they don't have to affirmatively assist us, the feds, in getting hold of these illegal aliens. But this isn't a question of assisting. This is actually interfering with, of harboring, of getting in the way. And so I don't think there's any question about this, and I think it's time for zero tolerance and getting back to basics, which are that judges and state officials are still citizens, they're subject to the federal law, and they cannot interfere in or impede the federal function.
And that's exactly what's been happening, right? They're impeding the federal authorities in being able to do their jobs. As far as the California Judge Thurston, trying to say that, okay, you must present a warrant You must do that if you're going to arrest an illegal migrant. That's where, I'm sorry, I think they're just way out over where they should be, because this is not their decision to make. It really isn't. So it may actually wind up in the Supreme Court. We'll see how this all shakes out. But I want to get to that Milwaukee judge. You've seen the lowers on the bottom of the screen there talking about how she's been thrown out of the court there, or suspended, I should say, in Wisconsin, the higher court ruling that, you can't just be out on your own, like saying, okay, I'm gonna release this criminal. I mean, come on. Unbelievable stuff. This really is a breakdown. And the left is deliberately doing this. They want this breakdown. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself why the heck they wanted all these people coming into the country in the first place. 250,000 a month. Talk of some 21, 22 million people being here illegally. That's not cool. You actually need to know who's in the country, and you got to be vetting people first, for goodness sakes. I'll tell you what, I've vetted for you Balance of Nature. My friends over at Balance of Nature, one of the great sponsors of the Trish Regan Show, they have a great deal for you. You can get 35% off. I take my fruits and veggies every day. This is great, actually, because everybody's so focused right now, and rightly so. You hear RFK Jr. all the time talking about ingredients that are in things, and you've heard me mention before that these are gluten-free, for those of you that care, but it's better than that. All of the ingredients, totally natural. And you should get all the ingredients you possibly can. Listen, eat your broccoli every day, right? You should be eating as much as you can that is healthy and natural. But when you can't get it all, and if you're like me and you don't get enough sun and you don't eat enough vegetables at times, dare I say, this comes in handy, because having that multivitamin actually, for me anyway, gives me those higher vitamin D levels that I need, that I crave, and that, are essential for functioning at your very best. And so this is where Balance of Nature, I think, really makes a difference in people's lives. Certainly has in mine. Balanceofnature.com. Use code word Trish. 1-800-246-8751 is their number. Use code Trish when you call them. You'll get 35% off, free shipping, plus a money-back guarantee. The court is suspending that Milwaukee judge. Unbelievable stuff. I cannot believe that a judge would think that it was totally fine and totally cool to be out there saying to somebody who's been accused of domestic violence is in your courtroom, for goodness sakes, because of domestic violence. You're a woman. You don't care about the woman at all that was the victim here. She didn't even inform the victims, by the way. She just took this guy because she saw the ICE agents outside, and she brought him into her chambers, and she lets him out the back door. What kind of crazy world are we living in when now the judges are letting the alleged criminals walk free? This is Judge Dugan. You see her here. She had to flee herself out the back door, I guess, when the cameras caught up with her.
Judge.
You hear the reporter. She's not taking any questions. Nope. No questions. Thank you very much. She gets into her SUV and off she goes. You see, she's got protection, right? What does she care about any alleged criminals on the street? She's got her SUV, her driver, the whole thing. Well, anyway, they have arrested her. The FBI has arrested her. And as a result of that arrest, guess what? The higher court there in the state of Wisconsin said, well, we really can't have you on our court, given that you are the subject of an FBI investigation and they are charging you here in this case. But think about where we are right now and how we got here, and the idea that you have millions and millions and millions of people, many of whom are believed to be criminals. How did we get here? Oh, I know. Biden. Tom Homan knows that too.
Look, I started in the Border Patrol in 1984. I've been at this for over 40 years. I worked for 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. Every president I ever worked for took border security seriously, because you can't have national security if you don't have strong border security. We got to know who's coming in, what's coming in, where's coming in, why it's coming in, right? Even President Obama and President Clinton took some steps to secure the border because they understood national security was important. Joe Biden was the first president in the history of this nation who came into office and unsecured a border on purpose.
Wow. And why was that? I really am starting to believe it was a gerrymandering operation, right? They wanted to have higher populations in certain states, therefore they could get more representation in Congress. Also, perhaps, just look at the state of New York. They were thinking, maybe we can get some people voting in elections. They had 800,000 non-citizens that they wanted voting in the state of New York until the court struck it down. This is wild stuff. In the meantime, you get students from all over the world coming here, causing a ruckus, and the State Department's like, we're not having it. They just revoked 4,000 visas. So people are all worked up about this. This one kid actually just got out of ICE, the Columbia student, not the one that we keep talking about, Mahmoud Khalid, it's a different one. And this guy's now sort of championing the movement. He's a Palestinian student who was just released actually by ICE. I'm not sure what his fate is going to be at this point. I imagine he's losing his visa too, or at least after he said this. Here he is, rebel rouser that he is, trying to motivate and incite the students there at Columbia, which used to be a great school. I actually went there back in the day when it was pretty decent. Can't say that anymore. Here we go.
What did they do to me? They arrested me. What's the reason? Because I raised my voice and they said no to war, yes to peace. Because I said enough is enough to President Trump and his cabinet. Yes. I am not afraid of you.
Okay, no fear. Well, you may just be sent packing pretty soon. It's not going to work. And they can stand in the way of that. You can go back to the 1952 law where basically it authorizes the Secretary of State to personally make a decision that somebody is in the country and not in a way that is helpful to the nation. In fact, in a way that is incredibly detrimental to our foreign policy. So if you're at odds with our foreign policy, well, guess what? You're not going to be welcome in this country. It's something that Marco Rubio said a couple of weeks ago. Let me remind you, he was very clear on this.
We revoked her visa. It's an F1 visa, I believe. We revoked it, and here's why. And I'll say it again. I said it everywhere. Let me be abundantly clear, okay? If you go apply for a visa right now, anywhere in the world, let me just send this message out. If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities, harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus, we're not going to give you a visa. If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa. And once you've lost your visa, you're no longer legally in the United States, and we have a right, like every country in the world has a right, to remove you from our country. So it's just that simple. I think it's crazy. I think it's stupid for any country in the world to welcome people into their country that are going to go to your universities as visitors. They're visitors. And say, I'm going to your universities to start a riot. I'm going to your universities to take over a library and harass people. I don't care what movement you're involved in. Why would any country in the world allow people to come and disrupt? Now, we gave you a visa to come and study and get a degree, not to become a social activist that tears up our university campuses. And if we've given you a visa and then you decide to do that, we're going to take it away. I encourage every country to do that, by the way, because I think it's crazy to invite students into your country that are coming onto your campus and destabilizing it. We're just not going to have it. So we'll revoke your visa, and once your visa is revoked, you're illegally in the country and you have to leave. Every country in the world has a right to decide who comes in as a visitor and who doesn't. If you invite me into your home because you say, I want to come to your house for dinner, and I go to your house and I start putting mud on your couch and spray painting your kitchen, I bet you're going to kick me out. Well, we're going to do the same thing if you come into the United States as a visitor and create a ruckus for us. We don't want it. We don't want it in our country. Go back and do it in your country. But you're not going to do it in our country.
Wow. I mean, that was such a compelling soundbite from him. Again, it was a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to show it to you again. He's been very clear on this, and he has the authority by way of a law that was written in actually back in the Cold War days, because, hey, you know, if you have people that are trying to undermine the policies of the U.S. State Department, then you probably don't want those people here. And that's just the reality of the world, okay? That's just reality. Thank you very much. We got a market that was lower today. Again, the GDP news. I'll tell you, the GDP news is not exactly what you think, only because it's down 0.3%. But one of the things that people forget about is that you don't factor in all the spending for the imported goods in that GDP number. Just the way they calculate these things. It's kind of wonky, but a lot of companies spent a lot of money actually on foreign goods so that they could get it into the country ahead of any of these tariffs coming in. And so what I would tell you is that the spending that we're seeing in the nation is actually alive and well. You had some visa data pointing that out as well today. We did a report on this over at 76 Research. I encourage you to go to 76 Research, my company that I started with a very dear friend. Use code word dollar. We have a lot of good information there for you, but it's very clear that there's a lot on the table right now as far as the stock market goes. Donald Trump making the point in that cabinet meeting moments ago that, you know what, these tariffs, they actually ultimately will be okay. As for the stock market, it's Biden's problem, he says.
Yeah, for the transition, sir, you frequently took credit for the stock market highs. You said it was a reflection of how well you were doing in the polls, and then after you were elected, you said the stock market highs were a reflection of how well the transition's going and the American people's confidence in your incoming administration. Now, the stock market's not doing so well, and you're saying that's the Biden stock market, yet you are the president. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'm not taking credit or discredit for the stock market. I'm just saying that we inherited a mess, both at the borders. You could look at every single one of the people here, and no matter who it is, they're doing better, and they are far superior to what took place for 4 years before us. When you look at prisoners being allowed to come into our country at will, just at will, people from mental institutions, gang members, drug dealers, when you look at that, what they've done to our country, and also having to do with finance, look at what happened with inflation. We had the worst inflation probably in the history of our country. They say 48 years, but I would say in the history of our country, it ate away at people. And even though you saw...
He's right on that. The inflation was absolutely terrible, absolutely terrible. And, we've seen a lot of that inflation, I should point out, in healthcare costs, right? That's been one of the worst places. I mean, it's been everywhere. You get inflation right across the board. But one of Trump's purposes there, one of his goals, one of his desires, and you have only to look at the executive order he recently signed, is to lower the cost of healthcare, including drug costs. It is a passion of his, and believe me, when he's committed to something, he's all about getting that done. So the question is, how do you do that, right? How do you do it, especially in a world where you've got big pharma spending big money to try and gobble up as much market share as they possibly can? The president has a lot of decisions to make, and you got big pharma, big article in the Wall Street Journal today, actually, talking about this, really lobbying hard to make sure that smaller businesses don't have the leverage that we need them to have in order to negotiate on behalf of their employees, on behalf of their companies. And so they're trying to take out the PBMs as the guys in the middle. Before you say, the middlemen, they're taking all the money. Actually, the middlemen are the ones that are trying. You pay them to go out and negotiate a better price for you. And so the big pharma companies, they don't like this. I sat down moments ago with Brian Lanza from Mercury, who works with a lot of these PBMs, to talk about it. By the way, I should just point out, Brian actually used to be on the Trump campaign. He was one of the senior people there. And whenever we needed anybody on the Trump campaign, I remember back in 2016, Brian always had good people for us. So I've known him for a while. Let's listen in. I sat down with him moments ago. Brian, my friend, it's really good to see you. It's been a while. Just so the viewer knows, Brian Lanza, he's at Mercury now, but he used to be the guy that would book all the guests on my program back at Fox in 2016 during the campaign. The good old days, right, Brian?
Yes, very much the good old days.
Well, I'm glad. What'd you say?
The golden age, as they say. Right?
The golden age. Well, I think we got another golden age going on right now. I got to tell you, there's a lot of excitement in terms of all the policies and all the executive orders that are going through. And there's a lot of hope about the momentum that's underway. We saw, and I've told the viewers about this, how the president was signing an executive order most recently to bring down drug prices. And this has been, I know, a big focus of his, a passion of his, and you know a lot about this, so I figured it'd be good to have you on to kind of explain this. There's a goal to lower the cost of drugs, but I guess the question becomes, how does one do that when you have these big pharmaceuticals? And look, I get it, right? I'm a capitalist. I want them to make money. I want them to invest in research and development. I want them to come up with the best drugs to have the best health opportunities for Americans. But something's getting a little lost on the way to the forum because these things cost so much that a lot of people can't even afford them.
No, it has gone lost. They've lost their purpose. I work with PBMs, and I'm proud to do it because oftentimes our customers are small businesses. People of 20 people or less who have to go before these huge corporations to try to negotiate small prices. So what we've learned and what PBMs do is they pool together a bunch of other small businesses to try to leverage a better negotiation position. That's very much the free market. We're not faulting pharmaceuticals for what they're doing, but the free market says that they get to have their own advocate on their behalf to try to negotiate lower prices. And the best way to negotiate lower prices with anything related to drugs and healthcare is to pool people together, and that's what PBMs do. And so I'm not surprised that pharmaceuticals want to shut down PBMs because we've been successful at defending and saving money for American consumers, small businesses. They have their goals, but our goals are different. Their goals is to maximize profits, and our goals is to maximize profits for our customers.
There's actually a big article in the Wall Street Journal about this exact topic today, and they're talking about how much money is being spent by the pharmaceutical industry to shut down the PBMs. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. So just let's think this through. I'm a small company. I actually don't have a ton of employees that are getting health insurance or anything. But if I did, right, the last thing that I would have time for is trying to negotiate with the health insurance companies. The paperwork alone, I gotta tell you, Brian, it is a lot, right? It is a lot for any individual, let alone a small business owner trying to negotiate on behalf of one's employees. It just wouldn't happen. And I look at this and I'm like, okay, you're gonna take them out? It's a free country. We all are capitalists here. Last I checked, we ought to be able to ensure some kind of advocacy, right? For ourselves, for our employees, for our companies. And is that the role of the PBMs? And why on earth would we lose that?
Yeah, because we don't fit their corporate structure, right? At the end of the day, pharmaceutical companies, they have to, squeeze as much money they can out of their customers. And when they have somebody like us that are in the middle, they refer to us as the middleman, say, no, you're not going to be able to squeeze this small family business of 10 people. You're going to have to negotiate with a broader pool of, let's say, 10,000 people. You're hurting their profits. They very much, pharmaceuticals very much have the advantages over small businesses, and that's why PBMs exist. We're their advocates in this negotiating process to make sure that small businesses have the resources to expand, have the resources to do research and development, and make their products better. And pharmaceuticals see us as that impediment to their profits. So it's a push and pull. We're on the side of small businesses and customers who want to drive down their prices. Pharmaceuticals are there to do hocus pocus, to try to convince you that they're on your side. I think we've known over the last 30 years they're not. It took President Trump to open up Republican Party's eyes that these pharmaceuticals companies were taking advantage of small businesses. You have to remember, for a long time, the Republican Party never questioned anything that pharmaceutical companies did. It was President Trump standing up and saying, no, this isn't right. This is actually affecting, my constituency, a lot of working class folks, a lot of small businesses, and we need to fight back. And we're happy to have President Trump on our side on containing the cost of prescription drugs. But that doesn't mean these pharmaceuticals are going to stop. They know what they need to do, and they're going to go to the maximum every time to squeeze their profits off of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly important for small businesses, without a doubt. But I was even thinking about it. I'm like, if you're a big business, even, if I'm Boeing, shouldn't I be focusing on the planes and making sure they're not falling out of the sky, as opposed to, trying to figure out how I'm going to negotiate on behalf of my employees with these giant pharmaceutical companies? It just seems like that's not their business, right? And that's on a major scale with a huge company. But you think about these smaller companies, and it's not their business either. And so I think the advantage here at the PBM is you can outsource this, right? Outsource it to somebody else who specializes it. And then you get together with all the other small businesses, and suddenly you get some stature.
Oh my gosh, you have a tremendous amount of stature and leverage, right? You are in any negotiations, you're always benefited with the numbers that stand next to you, right? You have pharmaceuticals, they're standing behind thousands of employees, millions of dollars. On our side, we're standing with small businesses, not just one small business in the community, but most likely hundreds of small businesses in the community. And we're pulling our resources to make sure that we negotiate the best deal, for small businesses or customers.
What does the world look like without that?
High cost. It's just completely unrestricted from the pharmaceuticals from just driving up the cost. Now, we all know that they're going to say the right language when President Trump's here in Washington, D.C., that they support smaller, they support lower prices, and they're going to do the things to get there. But at the end of the day, we also know that their responsibility is not the consumer. It's not the small businesses. That's Trump's responsibility, and that's our responsibility, and that's where we're happy to fight along with President Trump. They're going to do what they can. Pharmaceuticals do what they can, but we know what we need to do.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, and I know that there's a grassroots effort going on. You're part of it, and you work with a lot of these PBMs. Pharma windfall is where one needs to go if you want to learn more about this and just how bad these pharmaceutical companies are, or if you want to become involved in this movement somehow. Because I think that, as much as people can do to kind of somehow engage in this process and make sure that your voice is heard with your representatives in Congress, your senators, et cetera, I think that goes a long way. And so it's about getting the word out and consumers saying, you know what, we're not going to tolerate it anymore. Small business owners saying we're not going to tolerate it anymore. And we need, we need what we need, right, in order to survive and succeed. And it sounds like, and again, it's not that it sounds like, it's just the reality that you need somebody else doing that. Like it's hard enough, right? As a mom of 3 kids, like managing insurance, let alone if you're running it for a small company.
Yeah, listen, we all need help in this process, and I need a mechanic to work on my car. I need a tax preparer to work on my taxes. I need a PBM to negotiate against these pharmaceutical companies, or, it's not going to bode well for my business.
I hear you. Hey, Brian, it is so good to see you. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time today. Brian Lanza.
Let's do it again. Take care.
You bet. Good to see him. Anyway, pharmawindfall.com if you want more. I think the big question right now is what's happening next, right? For tariffs, for our economy, you look at some of the reluctance in investors today in the market. Donald Trump talking about this just moments ago. I want to go to some of these clips because this is compelling. He's once again saying, look, we're going to get a deal. Guys, calm down, because guess what? We have the upper hand in here in this whole thing. We've got an economy that China needs, right? How long are you going to really have that, given the size of China's economy and all that they're doing right now? They are getting hammered. He's absolutely right when he says this. Of course, we do run our certain risks as well. But I have a feeling when this all gets done, it's actually going to be less scary than what people are suggesting right now. And I think if it were going to be more scary, you'd actually see more reluctance in the market. Overall, still, the market ending off, not so bad today, not so bad. Here's Donald Trump again in that cabinet meeting moments ago talking about China and just exactly what we should be anticipating.
I know that China is doing very poorly right now. I just saw some reports coming out, and I don't want that to happen to China. I like the president a lot, President Xi. I don't want it to happen. I was actually saddened to hear it, but they are getting absolutely hammered in China. But their factories are closing all over China because we're not taking their product. We don't want their product unless they're going to be fair with us.
That's, I think, the key element to all this, unless they're going to be fair to us. And so you've got to think about equity in all of this. And in other words, if we're sending stuff there and they're slapping a big tariff on it, but we're taking stuff here and they're not slapping a tariff on it, isn't there some kind of middle ground? I realize, we don't want to be making shirts and underwear, we t-shirts and underwear and socks and stuff. There are things that maybe it makes sense, right, to outsource for. But I think when it comes down to it, what this is really and truly about is the importance of the semiconductor industry, okay? The semiconductor industry, we're talking Taiwan. The reason we care so much about Taiwan is because they have the semiconductors there that we need for high-tech manufacturing. This is so critical. And so if China were to go in there and take, we got to do what we can to make sure that we get the semiconductor manufacturing right here on shore. You want all that high-tech manufacturing. And, some low-tech manufacturing to the extent that you need certain resources in the event that, God forbid, we ever find ourselves in another, 2020 situation where you couldn't buy Lysol. I mean, we had the chemicals, we had the factories, but it turned out that some of the components that went into the chemicals came from China. So you couldn't even get Lysol wipes forever. I'll never forget that. And I think that was a big awakening for everyone. A reminder, of course, we love our sponsors here on the Trish Regan Show, and we love gold here on the Trish Regan Show. Trish loves gold. Can't forget it. Okay, you can up to $15,000. I like silver now too, because silver's been rallying along with gold. Just text Trish to 65532 or call them at 1-844-495-1115 for up to $15,000 in free silver. And of course, my own company, 76 Research. Let us help you navigate these choppy waters. We got a lot of great ideas. Just put out a very big piece today. I love having you all here. Make sure that you subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, tell people. We are totally organic. All the success we've had is thanks to you guys. So thanks for all that you do. Thanks for your generosity and your support. And I'll see you right back here live again tomorrow.